So hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Thanks for your lovely comments. This is part 2, what if Izuku had a bone quirk? Before I start, please do support for more amazing content. We consider you to subscribe my channel and share this video to your friends. And check out the description as well. This move could be useful to the two of you, so I need the both of you to focus. Aizawa snapped his fingers, gaining both boys' attention. Izuku, you first. Izuku smiled and eagerly ran up so he was in front of his father. Okay, arms up like you're ready to attack. Aizawa ordered and Izuku did just that. He raised his arms like he was prepared for a fight. Good, and now I. His father paused before pulling a small butter knife out of somewhere on his person. Have a knife. What? Are you gonna spread butter on Zuchan's forehead? Hiken couldn't help but snigger. He quickly ate his words as with a well-placed flick of his wrist, Aizawa threw the knife, and it stuck to the tree just a few inches from Hitoshi's head. Hitoshi's eyes darted from the butter knife to their father. It's still a knife, jackass. Now toss it back, Aizawa demanded. Hitoshi did so without much complaint. Okay, Aizawa held the butter knife up once more. I have a knife dash. Wah! Izuku had no time to react as Aizawa suddenly grabbed him by the collar and pulled him in close, the tip of the butter knife against his neck. It was now Izuku realized why his father had chosen a butter knife as his weapon of choice. And I want everything you have. Your bag, phone, and money. Now. All of it. How do you defend yourself? Izuku was close to his father, uncomfortably so. I can't try and sweep his leg out. It'll bring the both of us down, and leave me potentially open for an attack. So, I should try and hit him in the face. So, Izuku went for an uppercut. Aizawa seemed to sense this, and he nodded. When Izuku mimicked an uppercut, lightly placing his closed fist on the bottom of Aizawa's jaw. Uppercut, not bad, but let me tell you the truth. You're going to be punching my jaw with your knuckles. That's going to split your knuckles open and possibly even break a bone or two in your hand. Aizawa explained, and he lowered the butter knife from Izuku's neck. So today, I'm going to show you two another form of attack. The palm strike. The palm strike is less likely to hurt your hands or break your bones, and it'll daze your opponent, giving you the opportunity to get away. Aizawa then looked at Izuku. Are you okay? Izuku blinked in surprise before nodding. I'm fine, Dad. Wake up. Dad? Fanba dash. Hey, Fanba, you okay down there? Izuku opened his eyes to someone standing over him, lightly hitting his face. His training took over before his logic did. Izuku used his open palm to strike under the man's chin. The man let out a gag of surprise as a small spray of blood left his mouth. Oh, Jesus! Izuku cried out, and he jumped in surprise as he tried to scramble back away from the stranger. Then, Izuku realized just who he had struck. All Might. He struck the number one hero in the world, directly in the face. Ah! The scream that left Izuku's mouth was so high-pitched that it could have mimicked a bird's call. Izuku clambered around so he was bowing on his hands and knees in front of All Might. Forgive me! I was startled. Woof! All Might gave his head a good shake, a small bruise resting under his chin now. Now that woke me up! That was a good hit! Are you alright there, Fanba? Izuku looked up cautiously. You're not mad? Of course not, my boy. I'd say that's a pretty normal reaction after being attacked by a villain. Attacked by the sludge villain. Horror must have etched itself across Izuku's face because All Might suddenly let out a booming laugh and clapped Izuku on the shoulder. Not to worry, my boy. He's not going anywhere dash. All Might pulled a soda bottle out of his cargo pants pocket. See. Inside of said bottle was the villain. The villain and Izuku locked eyes, and Izuku could hear the villain shouting through the bottle, though it was heavily muffled. Izuku then smiled with relief. That does make me feel better. Thank you, All Might. Izuku bowed in respect. If it's not too much, do you think I could get an autograph? My brother will flip when he learns I got to meet you and my dad dash. Izuku's smile suddenly slipped as he stood up in alarm. My dad is going to flip. he whispered in shock. What am I going to tell Dad? That I let my guard down and got attacked by a villain and nearly died. Yeah, that'll go over well. Maybe I don't have what it takes to be a hero after all, and Dad'll see it just as well. It seemed All Might didn't hear the last part. Already have. Just check your notebook. Well, this has been fun, but I should really take this guy to the police station. Maybe All Might no, don't bother the man any more than you already have. Just one more question before he leaves. Oh no. Izuku, having been stuck in his head for too long, saw All Might getting ready to leap off into the air. Stop him. Wait, I have dash. Until next time. Izuku had no memory of what happened next. 1 minute he was on the ground rushing towards All Might, and then the next, he was in the air, clinging to All Might's leg like a toddler as the wind whipped at his face. Oh God, if his father heard of this! Izuku would be grounded till college. It took a painstakingly long time for All Might to even notice Izuku. What? I just have a question. I'm sorry! Izuku cried over the winds that whipped his face back at disgusting speeds. Alright, Fanda, just hang on. All Might seemed to sigh in annoyance at this as he planted one of his big hands on Izuku's head, most likely just to keep Izuku still, and to make sure he doesn't go flying off by accident. It didn't take All Might long to find a suitable place to land, up on top of a large building. The moment they landed, Izuku fell to his butt and sighed out as he looked at the sky. Now, I've seen some reckless things in my day, but I have to say that was one of the most, if not the most reckless thing I've ever had the displeasure of witnessing. What if I hadn't noticed you? What if you had slipped? Getting scolded was never fun. It was doubly so when it was your own personal and favorite hero doing the scolding. I'm sorry! Izuku quickly scrambled so he was once again bowing in apology to All Might. I know it was a stupid thing to do, but I just wanted to ask you a question and I didn't think I'd ever have this opportunity again. All Might, clearly in a hurry, cut Izuku off. I'm sorry, kid, but I can't answer any more questions you have. I have to go. He looked ready to take off again, and honestly Izuku knew he deserved it, but damn it, he wasn't satisfied with that. He needed an answer. Please! I'm quirkless. I just need to know if I have what it takes to be a hero, to be like you. Is it possible? You're quirkless? All Might paused before he could leap away. Izuku swallowed hard. My dad and my twin both believe in me, and that's great. I couldn't be happier, but they both have quirks and they couldn't understand what it's like to be fully quirkless. Is All Might smoking? Izuku thought as he looked at All Might fully. Smoke levitated off of All Might's body like he was on fire from the inside out. That was the only thought he could have before All Might poofed into a cloud of white smoke. Another scream ripped through Izuku's throat as a different man now stood in front of him. This man was a stick. A walking skeleton, a ghoul, complete with sunken-in black eyes. This man was the complete opposite of All Might in every way, shape, and form. Then he coughed and Izuku screamed again as a spray of blood left All Might's mouth. Who are you? What did you do to All Might? Oh God, did I get kidnapped? Dad's going to kill me. Calm down. All Might continued to cough until eventually his fit died down. And keep quiet. Do you want the world to hear you? He lightly hissed at Izuku. I don't understand. Izuku whispered in shock. There's no way you can be the real All Might. No way. I am All Might. The man sighed out, and in doing so even more blood seemed to pour out of his open mouth. Once again Izuku couldn't help but scream. Only now he was screaming because of how much blood All Might was losing by the second. But how can you be All Might? All Might is big and buff and you. Izuku guessed it to the twig of a man before trailing off. Well, never mind. A low and loud sigh left All Might's mouth as he ran his fingers through his hair. Okay, you know how at the beach guys suck in their gut and try to buff up to impress the ladies? That's what I'm doing. Eh? Izuku honestly couldn't believe what he was hearing right now. All Might was just faking it? Buffing himself up to look more intimidating? Izuku's mind was currently short-circuiting, and the only thing he could think to say at that moment was, "But how? Why?" A loud sigh escaped All Might's mouth as he crouched down. "I guess there's no harm in showing you now." And with that declaration, All Might lifted his shirt up, and Izuku saw it. The wound that made Izuku's stomach churn. It stretched from All Might's stomach and webbed its way up to his torso with dull red scars. "Pretty bad, right?" "It's much worse than it looks," All Might told him. "I got into a fight 5 years ago that destroyed most of my respiratory organs and decimated my stomach. Because of it, I can only be a hero for 3 hours a day." Izuku's mind reeled as he tried to think back to the battles All Might had been in 5 years ago. 5 years? Toxic Chainsaw? Was it him? Wow, you really know your stuff, kid, but no. This never made the news. All Might finally lowered his shirt and gave his head a soft shake. "You asked me if you could be a hero while quirkless. It's great that your dad and twin have faith in you, but it's a dangerous world out there, kid. To not have a quirk would leave you at a huge disadvantage and almost defenseless against those with quirks," All Might told him. "You could always go into police work, although with heroes around, the police often get the short end of the stick when it comes to any hero work." Izuku sighed softly and looked down at his red shoes. "That being said, although it's not realistic, that doesn't mean your dream isn't unreachable." Izuku never perked up faster at All Might's words. All Might scratched his face. "It's really not my place to tell you if you have what it takes to be a hero or not because of your quirklessness. You seem bright." All Might put a hand on Izuku's shoulder. "And smart to boot. Your future should be up to you. No one else. You never know if you don't try." Izuku almost wanted to cry. Granted, it wasn't exactly a yes, but it wasn't a no either. "You'll have to crawl your way through hell and back, and work 10 times harder than any of your peers. Do you think you can commit to that?" Izuku didn't even need to think about it. "Of course. I'm willing to do anything to reach my goal of being a hero." "Then, there's your answer." There was a little more mirth in All Might's smile now as he suddenly put his hand on Izuku's head and gave his curls a small ruffle. Izuku was practically vibrating because All Might was ruffling his hair. "Now, I should get going dash." All Might ran his fingers through his own hair now. "I trust you can make your way back home fine." "Yes." "Good." In a rush, All Might was gone, down the emergency stairs of the building. Finally, Izuku's legs gave out and he collapsed onto his back to look up at the sky. Did that really just happen? He thought as he watched a cloud lazily move in the sky. It wasn't a yes or a no. "It should be up to me." All Might's words were repeating in Izuku's head on loop over and over again. An explosion suddenly sounded through the air, and it made Izuku jump up to his feet. "What the hell?" he whispered in shock as he looked towards the noise. It looked like it was coming from the shopping district just a few blocks away. "You did a good thing, Yagi. You didn't crush a kid's impossible dream." Toshinori slowly shut the door behind him. Now on the bottom level and on the outside, Toshinori just wanted to put this whole thing behind him. Really, even though a part of him felt bad. He was basically lying to that kid and to himself by default. He knows what it's like to be quirkless more than anybody. And he knows that being quirkless back then was different in today's standards. Izuku wouldn't stand a chance out there. It was the cold hard truth. Still, Toshinori just couldn't bring himself to destroy the boy's dream. A small cough left Toshinori's mouth, followed by a small spray of blood. "All right, you dash." Toshinori reached down for the soda bottle that should have been in his pocket, but he felt nothing but air. Fear gripped him like an ice-cold vice as he looked down at his pants. "Oh no!" he could only gasp out. The bottle wasn't there. The villain escaped. Off in the distance it sounded like an explosion went off. 3 missed calls from, "You're my dad." Oogie Woogie. 4 missed calls from, Hypno. 1 missed call from, Uncle Cockatoo. 1 missed call from, Auntie Midnight. Izuku was trembling as he looked at his phone in his hands. He was walking down the street, wanting to go home. His phone had been on silent the whole time, and because he was beyond late, everyone was rightfully worried about him. He was in the middle of debating if he should call Dad or Heiken first when an explosion sounded off not too far away from him. Oh man, did I accidentally walk towards the fight? I shouldn't. Izuku looked up at the smoke that wasn't too far away from him. The smell was almost sickening as it invaded the inside of his throat and nostrils. Still, Izuku moved to get a better view of the fight for himself. I'm already late and Dad'll kill me? Izuku's mind slowed to a crawl as he got into view of the fight. Kamui Woods was holding back the crowd with a web of wood that crisscrossed in every direction. Please stay back! Kamui called to the crowd in desperation. Izuku's heart absolutely sank once he saw everything. The sludge villain was in the center of the shopping plaza. The sludge was wrapped around a new victim. Whoever this victim of his was seemed to have some sort of fire quirk, as fire would burst out of the palms of his hands. No. An explosion quirk. This quirk was a dangerous one. Remember what Dad said. No such thing as a dangerous quirk. Just dangerous people. Izuku reminded himself. Regardless of if this person was dangerous or not, his quirk was the reason for the fire, and the reason why no hero could help in this situation. The area that the villain chose to attack was just small enough to where Empty Lady couldn't squeeze herself in. Because of the fires, Kamui Woods couldn't jump in and help the victim, and the other heroes were busy keeping the crowd back as well as putting out the fires. I don't understand. All Might had him trapped away in a bottle. Izuku couldn't stop his gasp of shock once he realized. He caused the sludge villain to fall out of All Might's pant pocket when he clung on to the hero's leg. This was all his doing. Izuku dropped his phone just as it lit up, indicating that someone was calling him. His hands went over his mouth in shock. You caused this. This is your fault. How can you be so damn stupid? Izuku could only stare in shock at the pure chaos in front of him. It was a bad situation that was only getting worse as the seconds ticked by. The poor person caught up in the villain. Izuku saw a glimpse of red eyes and blonde hair. And the next thing he knew, he was running. What am I doing? Dash. Kid, stop! Kamui Woods yelled and tried to grab Izuku, but Izuku was too fast for him. He ducked under Kamui's makeshift barrier and booked it for the sludge villain at full speed. Why am I? Because I just can't let that kid die. He's just a kid. Like me. Izuku realized his motivation, but yet, in the back of his mind, Izuku could hear it. A voice. A mocking childlike voice that was gruff and full of contempt and borderline hatred. Izuku couldn't focus on the little voice in the back of his mind as he realized that this person couldn't breathe as sludge was oozing down his throat. Izuku would know that firsthand. The first thing he did as he ran was rip his backpack off of his shoulder, and he swung it at the villain, all while screaming himself hoarse. You again! The sludge villain let out a shriek of pain as a book from Izuku's backpack struck him right in the eye. The villain's body seemed to move as he tried to rub at his hurt eye. This allowed the teenager to rip his face free from the sludge. He let out a weak wheezing cough, spitting up sludge and slime from his face. A weak spot. Remember what Dad taught you. A villain is only as strong as his weak point. Izuku cocked his arm back and curled his hand into a fist. And he has not one but two of them. Izuku then threw his punch. He struck the sludge villain directly in his second eye. It was a soft, spongy feeling. What? Izuku heard the teen whisper so softly that it was almost inaudible with the chaos going on around them. Izuku never got a chance to look at the teenager or even talk to him. You absolute bastard! Suddenly his arm was grabbed by sludge, and before Izuku knew it, he was trapped in the disgusting oozing fluid, and the villain was lifting him off of the ground. I'll make you pay for that, Dash! It seemed the villain was able to move his eyes all around his sludge-like body, but Izuku wasn't dumb. The villain couldn't see them if he had moved his eyes behind his body, so his eyes had to be somewhere where he would be able to see both of them. And Izuku was able to find just where one of the villain's eyes were. It was peering at Izuku at the bottom of the villain's body. Weak point. It was right in the perfect kicking range for Izuku. He sprang his leg back and kicked as hard as he possibly could. He knew it did more than just hurt by the scream the villain gave, But this also came with a price on Izuku's end. The villain decided to just toss Izuku away like he was nothing but trash. It was a harsh toss that sent Izuku flying away from the action. Honestly, Izuku was lucky he didn't hit a patch of fire as he rolled to a stop near an alleyway. Ouch. Izuku's mind spun for a moment as he slowly sat up on his arms. His vision was slightly blurry, but with a quick shake of his head he was able to correct it. When he managed to get a good look at what was happening, he saw All Might, the actual All Might, buffed up in front of the villain. And that was only for a second before Izuku went flying for the second time in under 30 seconds. This gust of wind was so intense and so insane that it sent Izuku into the alleyway, and he kept on flying back farther and farther. Izuku gasped and cried out as he hit the ground more times than he'd like to count. He was desperately seeking something, anything to anchor him to the ground. Eventually, he found it, a fire exit staircase hanging on a building. Izuku had to hold on to the staircase for dear life for several long agonizing seconds until finally the insane wind died down. Izuku then hung there like a rag doll. His trembling hands clasped tightly around the bottom rail of the staircase, as his legs limply dangled in the air. Holy shit! Was the only coherent thought in Izuku's head. Then it started to sprinkle. Rain wasn't predicted for today. Izuku looked up at the sky in slight bewilderment. Wait a minute, did All Might change the weather? With just a punch? Izuku blinked a little in shock before he just sighed. Incredible. Critically injured and he can still do amazing things. He whispered to himself before he finally let go of the railing of the stairway. The drop wasn't far, but it didn't exactly feel great on his ankles either. Izuku was tired. Beyond tired. He just wanted to go home in all honesty. Put this day behind him and focus on training for UA. He blinked at a weight in his hand and saw he had his phone. Odd. I thought I dropped this. Izuku thought before shrugging. Weird day. He chalked it up to that and that alone. He shoved his phone into his back pocket and walked up to the edge of the alleyway. As much as he wanted to go home, he needed his backpack and school supplies. His dad, though an understanding man, would not understand this. Especially if he learned that Izuku actively put himself in danger. While the other heroes worked on cleaning up the scene, a couple even praising the blonde teenager for being brave during the whole attack, and All Might was busy talking to the press. Izuku watched them for a few moments. He knew if he walked out into the fray he'd probably get scolded or worse, asked questions by the press. So, he decided to just stay put, hidden away in the alley. Though, he realized his little hiding place wasn't as hidden as he thought, as at one point he and All Might locked eyes with one another. Izuku begged him to keep quiet by putting his fingers to his lips. All Might seemed to be understanding this as he looked away. It was then did Izuku decide to finally call his family back. He had a feeling he had time to spare with all the heroes working to clean up the place. So, he got himself situated on a rocky and unstable milk crate hidden away against the wall of the alleyway. He flipped over the milk crate and sat down before calling his father. It rang once before. Where the hell are you? His father's voice was flat as usual, but there was an underlying tone of anger deep in his voice that told Izuku he was in deep trouble. I'm sorry, Dad. Izuku whispered and shifted himself on the milk crate. Izuku, you should have been home hours ago. This is beyond I'm sorry. This is unacceptable. You had me worried, Hitoshi worried, Hizashi and Namiri just as well. I'm practically out the door ready to look for you. I know. I kind of got mixed up with the villain. There was silence on the other end of the phone. It lasted 2 seconds, 3, 4. Tell me where you are. Now. Dad dash. Now. Izuku. So, Izuku told him where he was. I'm sticking close to the alleyway. I just need to get my bag. I'll be there in 10 minutes. Don't you dare move. Aizawa hung up after that, and Izuku felt a dread creep and settle into his stomach. I'm so dead. The excitement of the battle started to die down shortly after Izuku's phone call, and when the coast seemed to be clear, Izuku got up from his hiding spot. His legs ached and his arms felt oddly heavy. Still, he started to collect his things and put them away in his bag. He was maybe 30 seconds into this when suddenly a hand started to help him collect his scattered papers. Izuku looked up in alarm, but he relaxed a little when he saw it was All Might, but in his smaller form, not his buffed-up one. Small Might. Makes it easier for me anyways. I'm sorry, Izuku whispered as he tapped a few papers on the ground to get them straight again. I don't know why I did what I did, he continued to whisper. As you should be, you're a bit of a troublemaker it seems, but in all reality, I also owe you an apology. Small Might told him with a grunt. Izuku stopped collecting his papers and looked up. Why would you need to apologize? Small Might handed Izuku some papers and he happily took them. Because even though I told you it was up to you to be a hero, I didn't fully believe you had what it takes, and today, you proved to me that you do have what it takes. Izuku, you were a hero today. At least to me. A lump formed into Izuku's throat as he dropped his papers to the ground. Tears started to well into the corners of his eyes, and before he knew it, he was weeping. He wasn't sobbing, just weeping. But these were weeps of happiness. I'm sorry. Izuku sucked in a loud and shaky breath. That's all I really ever wanted to hear. A small hiccup left his mouth as his weeping was threatening to turn into sobbing. And I promise, sir, I promise you, I'm going to try and be the best hero I can be. I know you will, because if you'll allow me, young Izuku, I want to train you. Izuku felt like he could start crying all over again as he slowly looked at All Might with wide and wet eyes. I can't explain everything here, there are too many people that could possibly overhear us. Small Might dropped his voice to a whisper so small that Izuku almost couldn't hear him. Izuku wiped his unshed tears away from his eyes as he leaned in. Can I get your phone number? I have questions about your life that I need to know in order for this to work. Izuku didn't need to think twice about it. Fishing a pen out of his bag, he scribbled his phone number down on a piece of scrap paper and handed it to Small Might. However, this moment between them didn't last when Izuku's spidey sense seemed to kick in and he lifted his head up. Off in the distance he saw his father looking over the sea of people, clearly trying to locate him. My dad is here. I have to go. If I don't respond, I might be grounded, or dead dash. Small Might's face twisted in horror and Izuku quickly corrected himself. I shouldn't say that. He's a loving dad, really, he is, but I need to get going. Izuku's voice was quick and hurried as collected the rest of his things and haphazardly shoved them in his bag. Oh, real quick. I go to Kaisei Middle School. Izuku really wasn't sure if Small Might heard him or not, but he didn't have time to repeat himself as he waved his father down. Dad, I'm over here. You charged at a villain. Have you lost your mind? As much as Izuku wanted to lie to his father, he couldn't. At least, he couldn't lie about what he did as he tried to save the other teenager. He kept most of the All Might stuff a secret, save for All Might saving him the first and second time. Izuku kept his head ducked down as his father paced up and down in front of him. They were back home now in the kitchen. Hitoshi was immediately sent to his room just for the sheer fact that he may try to intervene or worse, add to the berating. Izuku eyed Tora sitting on the countertop, and he went to pet the cat in an attempt to soothe his nerves. Don't touch the cat, focus on me. Aizawa practically hissed as he continued to pace. Just what were you thinking, Izuku? Izuku brought his hand to his side. I wasn't thinking, Dash. That's apparent. I saw the guy being held hostage and Dad. He was just another teenager, he couldn't be older than me and, I don't know, my feet moved before my mind did. I know what I did was stupid and I know what I did was beyond reckless. But I was the one that allowed that boy to breathe again when the heroes couldn't. So, that's why you did what you did? To gain fame because you know I do not approve, Dash. Of course I didn't do it because of fame. Izuku knew he was probably going to regret raising his voice at his father, but he couldn't help it. He started to get a little heated, so much so that his face was flushing and his heart was skipping a beat. I did it because the heroes couldn't do anything to help that boy. He was drowning in sludge. I wasn't about to watch someone die when I could do something to help him. I didn't even know the guy. Dad! Are you going to stand there and tell me you would have let him die if you were in my shoes? This time it was Aizawa who seemed to flush a little. Do not twist this around on me, Izuku. And if I were there, of course I would have helped the boy, but there's a difference between you and me. What? That you have a quirk. Aizawa stopped his pacing, and in a sudden displacement of a lost temper he slammed his fist on the countertop with such a harsh thump that it not only caused the countertop to vibrate but also caused Tora to take off running. His eyes flashed a ferocious red and his hair rose to the air. No! That I'm a pro-hero. It's my job to save people, and you need to remember something important here and now. You are a child. This has nothing to do with your lack of a quirk. You aren't a pro, far from it. I understand you want to save people. Hell, Izuku, I even commend you for it because so few people actually want that these days. But what you did wasn't even reckless. It was so stupid. If you would have died because you charged into a fight that wasn't even yours to start with, did you even think of me? Or Hitoshi? Aizawa's eyes returned to normal and his hair lowered around his face. His father put his hand on Izuku's shoulder and leaned down so they were now eye to eye. He then lowered his voice. Don't you think your brother lost enough people in his lifetime? Izuku sniffled and raised a hand to wipe his tears away as he did think about it. Hitoshi learning the news that he had died from the sludge villain and is now alone with only their father. How Hitoshi would probably have even more nightmares now, no one he could crawl into bed with when the nightmares got too much. It just filled Izuku with so much guilt that it caused him to lightly cry. Yet, Izuku didn't regret helping that boy from the sludge villain. He only regretted the idea of leaving Heiken behind. Izuku sniffled lightly and wiped his tears away with the palm of his hand. Aizawa sighed. Just go to your room. We'll discuss punishment later. Izuku went to his room as requested, but he snatched up miso on his way. The calico mewed when he did this. Izuku shut his door, threw his stuff on his floor and plopped onto his bed with miso on his chest. Seeming to understand that he was upset, Miso stayed in place and rubbed her head against his face while purring. Izuku quietly scratched under Miso's chin for a while as he lay there lost in his thoughts. His thoughts were everywhere while he tried to decompress from the day's event. His thoughts would be of the boy he had helped save. How the boy looked just slightly familiar to Izuku, but he couldn't figure out why. Then they would shift to the sludge villain. The feeling of the thick sludge that would coat the inside of his throat still lingered and it made him gag every now and again. Then his memories would go to All Might and the injury. It was a lot and he couldn't even focus on one thought for too long. Eventually Izuku dozed off. His body needed the rest after such a day and experience. He only woke up slightly to the sound of someone opening his door, probably to let Miso out. He heard a sigh before his father came in. Izuku continued to lay there and tried to go back to sleep, hoping his father hadn't picked up that he had awoken. Aizawa quietly bent down and started to untie Izuku's shoes. In a few seconds he had the shoes off of his feet and down on the floor below. What am I going to do with you? His father then left shortly after that. It wasn't too long after that when his door opened again and he felt a weight on the edge of his bed, and before he knew it, Izuku was wrapped up into the loving arms of his brother. Hitoshi mumbled slightly as he nuzzled against the crook of Izuku's neck. Please don't do something like that again, Zuchan. Hitoshi whispered. Izuku mumbled his reply, but he really wasn't sure what he had said in response to his brother's request. Still, Izuku wrapped his arms around Hitoshi and nuzzled against his brother's chest. Izuku wished he could say it was one of the better sleeps he had, but that would be lying. He kept waking up with the fear that something was creeping, oozing down his windpipe in hopes of taking his body over. Even with Heiken holding him tight, those dreams and those feelings refused to leave him alone. You want to go jogging after school? His father inquired, an eyebrow raised up to meet his hairline. I want to be faster. I don't want a repeat of the sludge villain. Aizawa shut his eyes and crossed his arms over his chest, clearly thinking it over. It took about 30 seconds before he got an answer. Fine, but give me your phone first. Izuku chewed on the inside of his cheek, and did as instructed. His father opened it with ease before tapping on it a few times. I also don't want a repeat of the sludge villain, Aizawa commented. And because I love you, and until I can trust you properly, you now have a tracker app on your phone. This'll tell me your location if I need it. On a small bench at the local park, Toshinori, the name he preferred to be called in his smaller form, was asking questions about Izuku's home life, his diet, and his father. These were all things Toshinori needed to know in order to help train Izuku to be in his top shape. Toshinori was quietly typing on his phone after each and every question. Toshinori was frowning as Izuku informed him of what his dad had done. I wanted to fight it, but my dad is stubborn and smart to boot. He would have known something was up. I see. It's not the end of the world. It seems he's just paranoid, which is good in today's world, All Might muttered. Which brings me to my next question, one I've been suspecting for a while now. Is your dad a pro-hero? Yes. Izuku beamed. But he's underground, so you probably might not have heard of him. I thought as much. That explains things, and you said he trains you in the mornings. What kind of training? He teaches us basic self-defense, some martial arts, and sometimes he teaches us how to use binding cloths, though I'm not the best at it yet. Binding cloths? Hey, reminds me of someone I know. Toshinori chuckled. But I'm like 90% sure he's child-free. Oh. Izuku snapped his fingers. Dad also has us enrolled in acrobatics. He wants us to be as flexible as we can be by the end of the year. It's something he was self-taught in. So, there's that as well. Toshinori couldn't help but whistle. An underground hero and one hell of a teacher by the sounds of it. He wrote it down on his phone. Now your diet? Oh. Dad makes sure we get all the major food groups. He makes sure our diet is pretty healthy and not too many fatty or sweet things. He wants us to be in our top form. I expected as much. Still, I want you to write down what you eat in a day so I can gauge what may or may not need to be tweaked. Izuku nodded. Understood. All right, I think that's all for now. Thank you, young. What is your last name? Izuku bit the inside of his cheek again. He hesitated. Tora. Izuku Tora. And why do I feel like that's not right? It's, well, you can guess. Izuku tapped his two index fingers together. Your dad? Izuku nodded. It's on all official school work papers, but it's not my official last name. He's scared, you see. Izuku never thought he'd ever describe his dad as scared before. But it was the best word for this situation. Aizawa was scared. He was scared of someone recognizing his name and going after his boys. So, he pulled strings. Legally, Izuku and Hitoshi had Aizawa's last name, but on paper at school and other functions needed for it, it was changed to Tora. Tora. Aizawa named them after his cat. What's interesting is that Hitoshi didn't need to have his last name changed. Hell, he could have hyphenated it, but he didn't want his last name anymore. His last name was just a reminder of what he lost. Those were Hitoshi's exact words on the subject. Very well. I won't push it. Tora it is. Izuku Tora has a nice ring to it anyways. Izuku couldn't help but beam again. Alright, that should do it. Remember, text me a list of what you eat in a day. That does remind me. How is that you still have your phone? I figured it would have been confiscated. Dad gave me a choice. Either he takes away all electronics for 3 months or I run around the yard until I collapse. How low dash? 4 hours. Not counting how many times I stop to catch my breath or drink some water. Wow. Impressive. Thank you. Anyways, I should get going now. Likewise. See you soon. Izuku waved Toshinori goodbye before standing up and stretching his body. He was in athletic wear, and after stretching his upper body, Izuku quickly did some high knee steps before taking off in a jog. He wasn't lying to his dad. Even though he was training with all might, Izuku also wanted to be faster and better. He had to be. Once Izuku gave Toshinori all he ate in a day, and finished up some more questions, their training and his diet, which really wasn't much different, just more meat, less rice, was underway. Because of Izuku's schedule, and because of the fact that his father trains him and his brother in the morning, Toshinori had Izuku after school. Izuku was a little confused when Toshinori brought them to Takoba Beach. A beach that was once beautiful but now littered with trash and pollution. I trust your father's training in flexibility and speed. My training will be focusing more on muscle. You're going to need as much muscle as you can get, young Tora. And trust me, the combination of muscle and flexibility will come in handy as a hero. I'm ready, Izuku declared loudly and proudly. Great! You are going to clean the beach? Eh? Yes. In a puff of smoke All Might appeared, and it was almost like he was an entirely new person. You see, this rotting pile of trash? This is going to work out all of your major muscle groups in the upcoming months. Oh. I see. Izuku looked at all the abandoned appliances, trash, and items surrounding them. He felt a little overwhelmed by it. Who throws a refrigerator on a beach? Still, his dad didn't raise a quitter. Very well. Izuku rolled his shoulder blade in its socket. Tell me where to start. And thus, their training began, and Izuku's life somehow got more chaotic in the process. It was 3 months into training when the first and most noticeable chaotic thing happened to Izuku. It was when a new kid transferred to their school. Izuku was really only half paying attention when this kid was introduced by the teacher. Really, Izuku was focusing on his grip strength under the table. It wasn't until the kid spoke did it gain Izuku's attention. Yo! The name is Denki Kaminari. But you guys can just call me Kaminari, that's how things work here, right? Izuku whipped his head up at the loud voice of this newcomer. Kaminari stood there suddenly looking very unsure of himself. His hair was blonde, cut short, with a black lightning streak through the right of his bangs. His eyes bore the same yellow electric blonde that his hair did. It gave Izuku a sort of Pikachu vibe. But in a good way. A cute way. He had an accent, and when Izuku thought about it, it clicked. He's American. A couple of students snickered at Kaminari, as he awkwardly scratched at his face in embarrassment. Wow, not exactly a bright one, is he? Akisho laughed a snotty laugh that made Izuku's nose scrunch. Kaminari winced at this, and continued to scratch at the side of his face. Yes, that's how things work here. It was Hitoshi that came to Kaminari's aid. All while shooting a glare Akisho's way. And don't let mouth over there get the better of you. All he does is run his stupid mouth. Hitoshi Tora! The teacher snarled almost immediately. UI office. Just go. I am not putting up with you and your attitude today. In a bout of frustration, the teacher pointed towards the door. Izuku rubbed his tongue against the inside of his cheek. What the hell, Hitoshi? Since when do you speak up for the new guy? Izuku inquired in his head as he watched his brother leave. Hitoshi never bothers with new kids, nor does Izuku to some extent. Mainly because the new kids want nothing to do with Izuku, him being quirkless and all, but Hitoshi was another story. Hitoshi just never liked the idea of making friends. It was easier for him to be friends with Izuku than to have someone else to worry about. So, for Hitoshi to stick up for someone else was different. It actually left Izuku a little stunned in all reality. What about you, thing number 2? Have any smart comments? The teacher snapped in Izuku's direction. Izuku just quietly shook his head and went back to taking notes. He would have to talk to Hitoshi later. Good. Kaminari, you may take your seat now. Class continued on as normal after that. Izuku quietly mumbled under his breath as he wrote down his notes. This was much to the annoyance of his nearby classmates. He silently used the grip strength, occasionally switching hands every now and again. Thank goodness, he was ambidextrous. Finally, class ended for lunch and Izuku immediately packed up and grabbed his bento. He knew he'd be alone now that Hitoshi was, most likely, serving lunch detention for his little outburst, but that was fine. It gave Izuku more time to focus on training and what he needed to improve. He was going to move that fridge on the beach if it was the last thing he did. So, up to the rooftop Izuku went. Izuku was now following All Might's diet plan, just more on the meats and less on the carb-heavy stuff. Quietly, Izuku opened his bento once he was seated on the rooftop. It was so quiet, serene, and Izuku soaked up the quietness to the best of his abilities. It would be one of the few moments he would get. "Hey! You're a rooftop kid too!" And it was gone. Izuku looked over his shoulder at Kaminari. Yeah, I guess." Izuku answered politely as Kaminari came up and simply plopped down next to him. Izuku tilted his head at this before he lifted his bento up and started to eat. "So I was told that you and that purple-haired kid are, brothers?" "Hitoshi. And yes, we're twins actually." Kaminari's eyes lit up. "No way! I've always wanted a twin." Izuku chuckled before taking another bite of his food. He chewed, and then swallowed. "I can't help but notice your accent. Are you from America? You picked up on that, did you?" Kaminari rubbed the back of his head with an awkward lopsided smile plastered on his face. "Yep. Well, I'm half. My dad is American. I was living with him in America while my mom stayed in Japan." Izuku raised an eyebrow. "Oh. Yeah, they do not like each other." Kaminari then laughed. "But that's fine." "Fine?" Izuku just simply took in another bite of food while Kaminari continued to speak. "I was actually supposed to stay in America, you know? But I told my dad that I really wanted to be a hero and that the American schools just don't stack up to the school my mom went to. It took literally a whole year to get my dad to break." "I see, and that's why you're in Japan now, I take it." "Yepers." Kaminari started to eat his own food and talk with his mouth full at the same time. "I'ma go to Yewa." "Yue?" "No kidding, Hiken and I were hoping to go there as well." Izuku now smiled at Kaminari. Kaminari looked confused as he swallowed his food down. Hiken? "Oh. Hitoshi, I call him Hiken." Izuku scrambled a bit before blushing. "I see. Still, I have to ask, is it true?" Kaminari wiggled a little closer to Izuku now as if he didn't want anybody to hear. "Is what true?" Izuku inquired before taking a bite of his food. "That you and Hitoshi, Kaminari swallowed hard and made a face before he put his two index fingers together pointedly. "No? Are banging?" Izuku spat his food out. "We're brothers," he cried out in complete and total indignation. "That's just a word in the schoolyard if you get me dash." "A kisho." Izuku threw his arms up in anger. That. He stabbed his chopsticks into his bento in anger. Kaminari rubbed the back of his head awkwardly. "So you and Hitoshi aren't dash brothers?" "We're brothers. Why would I even? Yes, we're close, but to even insinuate that we GRG." Kaminari ducked his head at Izuku's rant. "Sorry." Izuku couldn't be mad at Kaminari. It wasn't his fault that a kisho was, not your fault. You didn't know. Still, you shouldn't listen to rumors. Yeah, I really should have just thought about it before speaking. I really should think before I speak." Kaminari chuckled softly, if not awkwardly. "I just heard and I wanted to know if it was true." "Hey man. I get it. It's not as easy as people think." Izuku huffed before crossing his legs. "Just know that any lewd rumors regarding me or Hiken are lies." "Understood. Now, is the other thing true? Are you really quirkless?" "Yep. And if that bugs you, there's the door." Izuku pointed to the rooftop doorway with his chopsticks. No, it doesn't." Kaminari waved his hands in his face drastically. Izuku must have had a look on his face because Kaminari added, "I mean it. It's interesting. My grandfather on my dad's side is quirkless." Izuku chuckled. "It's fine, and I'm sorry if I came off as rude." "It's no problem. I'm sure if I were in your shoes I'd be the same way." Kaminari sniffed. "So, if you don't mind me asking, what is your quirk?" Kaminari beamed at Izuku. "Electrification. Basically, I'm a human taser." "That's so cool." The rest of lunch was just the two of them talking about Kaminari's quirk. Izuku took his notebook out as he asked a boatload of questions to Kaminari, which the blonde was more than happy to answer. And that's how Izuku made friends with the chaotic, loud blonde. The exact opposite of his brother. Izuku was happy with training. Really. He was. His dad was working on getting him and Hitoshi flexible and agile while All Might trained his muscles. But man, if Izuku wasn't tired. It's been 5 months, and he still had 5 more months to go. It felt so far but so close at the same time. His stamina wasn't completely empty, he always had just enough energy to go each and every morning to night, but he still felt so drained. It was worth it. It was worth it. He was going to be a hero even if it was the last thing he did, and he wasn't going to be any hero, he was going to be the successor to All Might. He was going to get his dream and finally have a quirk, and Izuku was going to work and work until his limbs fell off. Which they felt like they were doing right now as he tried to pick up a microwave. He was getting stronger, he knew he was, the microwave wasn't as heavy as it once was to him. Still, his grip slipped and the microwave tumbled to the sandy ground. Izuku, in a panic to grab it, fell but somehow managed to trip over himself because of a discarded fishing net. Izuku was now laying there with his upper body on the fridge while his legs were tangled up below him in a net. Tiredly, Izuku groaned and looked over his shoulder at All Might. His mentor wasn't even paying attention to him as he spoke to some very happy fans. Izuku wasn't lazy, not in the slightest, but damn if he wasn't tired. He laid there for a few seconds and eyed up a discarded blender on the ground just a few feet in front of him. Who throws a blender away on a beach? Izuku reached out in an attempt to grab the blender, but it was just out of his reach. Izuku grunted as he tried to reach for the blender with his arms outstretched as far as they could go. He opened and closed his hands like a toddler wanting something from their parents. He closed his eyes as he continued to struggle against the net, kicking and twisting his legs in an attempt to be freed. Izuku didn't know what he'd even gained from doing this. All he knew was that he was exhausted and just wanted to get this beach cleaned. Izuku opened his eyes. Something cool and smooth was touching his open palms. Izuku looked at the blender now resting between his hands. He then looked back at All Might, thinking maybe his mentor had something to do with this. No, All Might was still talking to his 2 fans. Izuku looked back at the blender, and down where it once laid. The spot it was once embedded in is now an empty spot in the sand. What? Izuku breathed out in alarm. What? Izuku tried to stand, but the stupid net caused him to fall back down to his knees, nearly slamming them into the fridge. Did I bring you to me? He whispered in shock at the blender. Like it was going to answer back. No. I'm quirkless, this is a fluke? A freak of nature? There's no way that I... Izuku swallowed. You okay over there, Fanda? All Might's voice boomed over to him. The 2 fans were now long gone. Izuku debated on telling his mentor what just happened, but ultimately decided not to. Not until Izuku knew exactly what had just happened. I'm fine. Just caught in a net. Izuku muttered as he put the blender down on the fridge. No worries. He beamed back at his mentor. Once Izuku freed himself from the net. A process that took a painfully long time. He looked at the blender one last time before going back to his training. The first thing he was going to focus on was the net. That thing had to go. Still, even though he was focusing on finishing his training, Izuku had some serious questions. The first and most obvious one being, was he really quirkless? You'd think he'd know that question. But Izuku was still missing 5 years of his life. What are those memories hiding? Izuku had thought as he watched the sky start to turn a rusty shade of orange. And who's the one responsible for getting rid of them? He swallowed hard before physically picking up the blender. And why did they do it? Yeah. Start of the training montage. I have some ideas for this. This next chapter will probably focus more on training between Aizawa and Toshinori alike. His sons knew this, but also liked to think that he was, in fact, an idiot. But he wasn't an idiot, and that's why it pisses his sons off so much when they can't get away with anything they shouldn't be doing. Like Izuku. Izuku claims to be jogging for the past 5 months, yet he's packing on muscles on more than just his legs. He's been bringing grip strengths to school, something Aizawa knew he hadn't bought him, and he's been training with Aizawa's dumbbells. So, clearly, Izuku was being trained by someone else, and it was showing. Izuku's reaction times have been picking up as well when it comes to physical combat. Granted, so has Hitoshi's. Both boys were getting faster with combat training and more flexible thanks to acrobatics classes on the weekends. Still, that wasn't the point. Izuku was training with someone else, and Aizawa didn't like it. It's not even the fact that he's training with another person in his spare time, it's the fact that Izuku is keeping it a secret. Which is sending red flags into Aizawa's brain. So, Aizawa decided to do what he does best in these situations, make sure his child is okay and safe. He followed Izuku from school. Aizawa stayed on the rooftops as he jogged along, keeping pace with Izuku. At one point, Aizawa had to jog on the power lines. Eventually, they both made it their destination. Takoba Beach. Aizawa kept his distance on a nearby rooftop. "What on earth?" Aizawa whispered as he moved his slotted goggles up onto his head to get a better look down below. Izuku was simply cleaning the beach. Taking up trash and bringing it to a giant rentable dumpster, no doubt awaiting pickup. Izuku was just quietly doing this by himself for a while, and Aizawa wondered if Izuku simply did research on muscle groups and how to work them all out at once. It seemed logical, at first. If that were the case, then why wouldn't he tell me that he was doing this, or Hitoshi? He loves Hitoshi and would, undoubtedly, want his brother to get just as strong as him. Aizawa thought as he watched Izuku work. He's gained more muscle than I thought. Izuku was carrying a box spring mattress by himself. That thing had to be at least 60 pounds. Then, maybe 30 minutes later, the truth came out. "You're early, my boy." Aizawa rubbed his tongue against the inside of his cheek as he watched Tashinori come up to Izuku on the beach. Tashinori was in his skinny form, something Aizawa, as well as the rest of the staff at UA, learned about not too long ago. Irritation started arising deep inside of Aizawa's belly. Now it makes sense, doesn't it? He gets saved by All Might, and now All Might is training him. And judging by the fact that Tashinori is in his skinny form means that Izuku already knows, and has to keep it a secret, hence why Hitoshi doesn't know. Aizawa snorted in annoyance. "Yes, I wanted to get a head start today," Izuku eagerly told Tashinori. "Especially since we're coming up on a 2-week break in school after tomorrow." "Great! I love that attitude." In a puff of smoke, Tashinori was gone, replaced by All Might. However, the puffed-up form didn't last. Clearly he's used up his time limit for the day. Aizawa reached into his pocket and pulled out a pack of gum. He no longer smoked when bored, gave up the habit when he adopted the boys, now he replaced it with chewing gum. Popping a piece into his mouth, he started to chew away. The sweetness of spearmint overloading his taste buds. "Yeah, training is really going to be kicking off these next 2 weeks, between you, Dad, and acrobatic classes. But I'm ready for it." Aizawa could feel Izuku grin from his spot on the rooftop. Quietly, Aizawa popped a bubble. "Excellent! Now I want you to stop what you're doing. I want you to bench press this microwave." With no effort at All Might picked up a microwave with one hand. It looked heavy and expensive. No doubt 50 to 60 pounds tops. "Yes, sir." Aizawa narrowed his eyes as Izuku did as he was told. He got down on the floor and All Might put the microwave on Izuku's feet. There's no support. That's insanely dangerous. His legs could give out, or worse, he could get a compact fracture from the weight if he doesn't have the proper support. "Oh, I'm going to kill Tashinori." Tashinori clearly had the right idea, but he's going about it all wrong. Aizawa popped another bubble. It wasn't all Izuku's fault. It's clear, to Aizawa at least, that Tashinori has no clue how to teach or train. Izuku didn't break a bone, thank God, and after about 50 reps he was back on his feet throwing trash out. All Might would coach Izuku along, make him move faster, nothing as bad as bench pressing a microwave on the sandy floor. Granted, this whole thing was dangerous, and just asking for a future tetanus shot. The beach was uneven and the sand provided a danger as it hit things like glass, needles, and rusty metal. One wrong fall was all it would take. Toshinori, your idea is there, but you're going about it all wrong. This is a biohazard zone at worst and a disaster at best. You are the #1 hero in the world and you couldn't afford a gym membership? Another popped bubble. Aizawa grumbled as the sticky gum got caught in his stubble. Aizawa didn't agree, not one bit. Though he had a feeling he knew why Toshinori wanted this place cleaned, and it was a noble cause, of course, there was just too much to factor in. This needed professional cleaning, not a 13-year-old boy. Finally, after a few hours of this, the two went their separate ways. Aizawa watched Izuku start jogging towards home while Toshinori walked off towards his car. Aizawa followed Toshinori, and quickly jogged ahead of Toshinori. He used his scarf and hung upside down from a power line. Then slowly started to lower himself down as Toshinori was, seemingly, unaware of his presence. It wasn't until Aizawa was almost completely down did Toshinori stop walking. "I know you're there," Toshinori suddenly said. Of course he would pick up on someone's presence near him. He was the #1 hero after all. Shame Toshinori turned the wrong way. Aizawa lowered himself all the way when Toshinori's head was turned away. When Toshinori turned back around, his eyes widened almost comically while he took a step back. "Jesus, Aizawa!" Toshinori put his hands on his chest. "Warn a guy!" Aizawa shifted his body so he was now upright and on the floor. He let his scarf pull back around his neck, and he grabbed his goggles from up top his head. Toshinori sucked in several deep breaths and seemed to swallow down some blood threatening to spill out of his mouth. "What are you doing?" Toshinori demanded. "Just wondering what you're doing," Aizawa responded as he brought his goggles down from the top of his head and down around his neck. "What's with the boy?" "The boy? Oh, you saw that?" Toshinori pointed back to the beach and then looked back around at Aizawa. "That? Oh, just a fanba is all." "A fanba, huh?" "Yep. Seemed like you knew him. I treat everybody like I know them. After all, they know me." Toshinori grinned. Aizawa scowled behind his scarf. "Is that so?" "Judging by his reaction, he has no clue I'm Izuku's father." Aizawa sized Toshinori up for a moment before shoving his hands into his pockets. "I'm going to keep it that way. Just watch yourself, those fanboys can be dangerous." Aizawa turned away from Toshinori before vanishing up to the roof of the building. Let's see how far this goes. 3 days have passed since Aizawa made the discovery, and the three of them, Hitoshi, Izuku, and himself, were sitting down finishing up dinner. Aizawa was almost sure that Izuku was getting ready to confess to them about what he was doing with all might. His gaze was far away and his eyes were white in color, showing that he was lost in a deep thought. It was Tuesday, meaning Hitoshi washed the dishes, Aizawa would put them away, and Izuku would take the trash out. Hitoshi had heard it first, before Aizawa, because he put the plate he was washing back into the soapy water and snapped his head towards Izuku's direction. "Dad!" "Mutter." "It's your turn," Hitoshi grumbled before he went back to washing the dishes. Aizawa looked up at the ceiling and sighed. "Izuku." He tried to get his son's attention, but it was too late. "Mutter, mutter." "Izuku." "Mutter, my eyes were closed, mutter, mutter." Aizawa walked over to Izuku. Aizawa crouched down so he was eye level with Izuku. Aizawa reached over, grabbed the top of Izuku's head with one of his hands, and twisted Izuku's head around so they were now face to face. "Izuku, come back to me." Aizawa used his free hand to snap his fingers rapidly in front of Izuku's face. Izuku blinked and the color returned to his eyes. "I was doing it again, wasn't I?" Izuku whispered. "Yes, you were. Want to talk about what's on your mind?" Aizawa inquired. Izuku blinked slowly as he frowned. "I just wanted to ask, are you sure I'm quirkless?" There was a clatter from the kitchen. Aizawa looked over his shoulder to see that Hitoshi had, seemingly, dropped a plate into the water again by accident. Aizawa narrowed his eyes at this but focused back around to Izuku. "Lest you forget dash." Aizawa took it upon himself to fix Izuku's collar. "We went to 3 different doctors on the subject. They all confirmed it. You have the extra toe joint." "I know. Besides, if you did have a quirk, we would have known by now. Wouldn't we?" Izuku licked his lips. Yeah. You're right. Sorry." A soft sigh left Izuku's mouth as he rubbed at his face. "I just thought that maybe. I'm thinking too much about it, I'm sure." Aizawa nodded at this. "Possibly. Now, could you please go and take the trash out?" "Of course." Izuku scooted out of his chair and got up. He stretched his arms above his head before going to the trash can. The trash bag was always a little heavy. Living with 3 people in a house would do that. But now, Aizawa watched as Izuku hardly struggled to lift the trash bag out of the can and tie it. Then, looking like a deranged Santa Claus, Izuku threw the bag over his shoulder and went for the front door. When the front door shut behind him, Aizawa looked over at Hitoshi. Hitoshi had his head down and was scrubbing a plate above the sink. "Are you okay?" Aizawa inquired. "Of course. Why wouldn't I be?" It was a fast reaction and a defensive one as well. It made Aizawa narrow his eyes slightly. "You've been washing that same plate for 5 minutes now." Hitoshi blinked in surprise, looked at the plate, and huffed. "I figured you like thorough cleaning." Then put the plate on the drying rack. Aizawa couldn't help but chuckle as he walked over to Hitoshi. "What do you think about Izuku's question?" Hitoshi suddenly asked as he started washing a set of chopsticks. Aizawa shrugged. "Nerves, probably. Izuku is worried about getting into UA. Which reminds me, I need to talk to Netsu." Aizawa mumbled before shrugging. "Izuku thinks a quirk would be a magical cure-all for him." Hitoshi pursed his lips to the side at this. He looked like he had something on his mind, but if he did, he didn't voice it. Instead, he just finished up cleaning the dishes before retreating to his bedroom immediately after. Sweat perked and started to pour down Izuku's face. His legs were in the air, his shoulders and neck pressed firmly against the floor, the only part of him that was on the floor really. He had both of his hands against his hips while his father stood above him, hands on Izuku's shoes, keeping him balanced. His upper back was hurting, and he could feel the strain of his legs being suspended in the air for as long as they have. Aizawa tilted his head before letting go of Izuku's shoes, but Izuku didn't let his legs down. 30 seconds, Aizawa said before starting the stopwatch. Izuku bit back a groan. His back was already threatening to give out, and his shoulders were screaming in pain. That was when his dad squatted down next to him, showing him the stopwatch. "Now that I've got your attention, I have a question," Aizawa flatly said. "You want to interrogate me now?" Izuku breathed out. "Yes, you're vulnerable and in an uncomfortable position." There was a familiar smile on his father's lips. The smile Aizawa would get when he knew he had just played somebody for the fool. And that he did. Izuku should have guessed his father would pull something like this. Well, at least his father was honest. "Fine, ask your question." Izuku's eyes darted from his father's eyes to the stopwatch. The seconds were ticking by so slow, too slow. Izuku looked away from his dad as he looked up at the sky. His legs were threatening to buckle, to come crashing down, but Izuku was willing them to stay upright. "All right, I've noticed that you've been packing on some muscle these past few months and that your diet changed. Who's training you?" "Shit." Izuku grunted as his left knee nearly buckled. "Nobody." And why do I find that hard to believe?" "Izuku, I'm not dumb. You don't just gain muscle mass from only jogging." Izuku looked at the timer. Only 15 seconds had ticked by. "Okay, fine, you caught me." Izuku groaned a little as his body started to ache and protested against the strain he was being put under. "I've been cleaning a beach." "By yourself?" Izuku looked at the stopwatch. 10 more seconds to go. "Yeah. I've been learning about muscle gain and I figured I can do community service on top of it." Aizawa hummed and stood up. "Cleaning a beach? Aizawa then walked over to Izuku's legs. All by yourself? Why not have Hitoshi help you? Izuku grumbled something under his breath. If he was going to say something, it died in his throat. How much longer? Aizawa tilted his head and that familiar cynical smile graced over Aizawa's face as he showed off his teeth. Until you answer the question, Izuku. I just didn't want to bug him with cleaning is all. Aizawa let out a soft sigh and slapped Izuku's shoe. This caused Izuku's legs to just flop down. Izuku cried in pain as his back was adjusting to being flat on the floor now. I don't know how I feel about you going off to clean a beach by yourself. Especially not to Koba Beach. Izuku sucked in a deep breath before suddenly opening his eyes and frowning at his father. I never said I was cleaning to Koba Beach, Dad. Izuku then rolled onto his side and propped an elbow up so he could look at his father. Aizawa snorted. It's the only beach in the area that's ransacked with trash. It's pretty logical that's the beach you'd be going to. Aizawa then tossed something in Izuku's direction. Izuku quickly scrambled to grab it. It was just a water bottle. Hydrate, kid! Izuku let out a snort but did as his father asked of him. That was close. Izuku sighed out heavily as he looked over at his alarm clock. 4:27 a.m. The red light blinked at him, and he was just glad that school was out for the next week and a half. He rubbed his tired eyes. Slowly, Izuku sat up and ran his fingers through his curls to get them out of his face. His eyes dropped slightly and he quietly wrapped his blanket over his shoulders and wiggled out of his bed. His stomach gurgled and Izuku decided he needed a small, moderately portioned midnight snack. His dad wasn't home, so waking him wouldn't be an issue. Izuku shuffled his way into the kitchen with his all-might blanket covering his head like a hood and draped over his body imitating a cloak. Opening the fridge, Izuku looked at the leftovers for something to munch on. Oh, fried pork! Leftover fried pork from the night before. Izuku popped open the Tupperware and shut the fridge with his hip. He placed the lid on the counter and looked for some chopsticks. He found them sticking out of the drying rack on the sink. Izuku looked at the chopsticks, then down at the leftover pork. Is it possible? Izuku wondered as he thought about the day before, when the blender magically came to his hands. He's been thinking about it since it happened. No. I'm quirkless, I have the toe joint. What happened the other day was a fluke. Izuku whispered to himself before looking back down at his food. Another loud and irritated sigh left Izuku's mouth. He then shut his eyes and extended his hand out. He stood there for a few seconds with his hands out, but for the longest time, nothing happened. So, Izuku cracked one of his eyes open. The chopsticks hadn't moved from their spot on the drying rack. Izuku couldn't stop the pout from gracing his lips. Like I said. A fluke. Izuku threw his hands up before looking down at the fried pork slices. So, it wasn't because my eyes were closed. He looked back at the chopsticks. Then maybe. He brought his hand out and focused purely on the chopsticks just a measly few feet away. He raised his hand. Come to me. He closed his hand and opened it. The chopsticks wobbled. Izuku gasped, dropping the Tupperware of fried pork slices. He looked at the chopsticks with wide eyes. No. Izuku stared at his palms, down at the floor, then back at the chopsticks. Izuku's hands were starting to shake. He looked back at the chopsticks and with shaky hands, he raised them both up and stared at the chopsticks. With both hands raised in front of him, he opened and closed both of his hands. The set of chopsticks wobbled before slowly rising up and out of the drying rack. His breath hitched into his throat as he watched the chopsticks. Each time he opened and closed his hands, the chops moved to him. Closer and closer the chopsticks came to him until he felt the smooth wood touch against the palm of his hands. Izuku felt his eyes widen as his whole body shook from head to toe. Izuku clasped his hands around the wooden chopsticks. I just did that. I just did that. I just did that. I just did that. Oh my God! Oh my God! Izuku couldn't think, he could hardly breathe. I have a quirk, I have a quirk! He can. Izuku couldn't have run faster to his brother's room. He nearly slipped on the hardwood floors as he raced as fast as his legs allowed him all the way to his brother's bedroom. He can! Izuku excitedly threw his brother's door open. Hitoshi nearly jumped out of his skin as he flopped around his bed like a fish out of water. What? Hitoshi jumped and sat up swiftly, his hair puffed out around his face, his lavender-colored eyes wide with concern. Izuku was jumping on the balls of his feet. He felt excited, thrilled even. I have a dash. Izuku snapped his eyes open. He looked up at his ceiling with wide and confused eyes. What? Suchan dash. Hitoshi opened Izuku's bedroom door. You ready? Hitoshi was dressed in his working-out clothes. Hitoshi tilted his head and smiled at Izuku. He then started to stretch his shoulders. Izuku looked at Hitoshi feeling rather confused. Ready? He tilted his head to the side. Training. Dad told me to wake you. Izuku brought his hand to his face and rubbed the crown of his head. But what happened? Something happened? Hitoshi shrugged as he continued to smile an awkward lopsided smile. Izuku tried to think. What happened last night? Wasn't I? I was excited. About something? No. Yes. Earth to Izuku. You still with me? Hitoshi waved his hand in front of Izuku's face. When did I go to bed last night? Hitoshi shrugged. Around 10? Maybe a little later. I mean, you came into my room last night around 4. You looked so excited and then you had this weird blank look on your face and then you left. I thought maybe you were sleepwalking, or had a night terror. So, are you getting up or do I have to drag you out of bed? Okay. I'm up. Izuku threw his arms up in defeat. I was excited about something, but... Izuku wiggled out of bed before stretching his arms above his head. Shoo! Let me get dressed. Izuku gestured with his hands, forcing Hitoshi out of his doorway. And, Izuku grabbed onto his door and looked at Hitoshi. I was going to tell you something. But... I forgot. If you forgot, then it wasn't important. I guess. Get dressed. Yeah, tell Dad I'll be there in 5. Izuku then shut his bedroom door and stopped. He stared intensely at his door frame before shaking his head vigorously. Am I missing another memory? This was a part 2. Thanks you guys for unexpected love and supper. You guys are awesome. If you guys wants part 2, then let me know in the comment box. See you all in the part 3.